Hey, what's going on, everyone? Welcome back to Bad Dot Studios. Today, I got my buddy Colin with me. We're going to be talking about the pilot that was shot for a prequel for Game of Thrones called Blood Moon. The pilot was shot, but they ended up not greenlighting the whole series. It's supposed to be set 5,000 years before Game of Thrones. It was supposed to be released as soon as Game of Thrones ended, but ended up not being released. So we're going to get into that. We're gonna get into some pictures that was released from the pilot. So stick around and let us know in the comments what you guys think of the pictures, and let me know what you guys think of the Blood Moon, and if you guys are interested, if they should release some more stuff or yeah. But Colin, how's everything, bro? How you been?
It's great. Yeah, hanging in there. Always excited to talk about Game of Thrones. Anything
I
Game of
know.
Thrones related, I'm your boy for sure.
Yes, sir. And guys, Colin is the person who's read the books. You know, the people who follow me, on TikTok or on YouTube know that I am not a book reader. I'm just a show watcher. I give my perspective of what I see from the show and give my opinion and what I think is going to be coming next. Like I said in previous videos, I could be 100% wrong in some of the things I anticipate happening, which is the fun of, this show. Like I get to set my own narrative, which is pretty cool. But like we were talking before the show, some of the books that are like House of the Dragon, for instance, those are histories of what happened in that time period, and they're not like Game of Thrones. They were set for Jon Snow and Daenerys and all that stuff, so it was a little bit different. But I like that. I like that notion of you can put whatever in the show, and it might be a little bit different from the books. But as a book reader, if you see too much of a difference, do you get pissed off or do you start disliking the show if it's different in the show?
Yeah, I think that was my problem with the main series was a lot of the things that they changed I felt like weren't what I would have changed, or the
Okay.
the characters that they took away or the characters that they added, I wouldn't have gone that direction with it. And I genuinely think if you watch the show like season 1, 2, and 3, uh, probably the most book accurate. Starting
Okay.
in season 4 was when they really started to kind of split away. But again, it really just comes down to like I think it's like a book integrity thing, and I think most people feel that way who are readers of any genre. I think people were probably upset with like the Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe adaptation. There are people who are upset about even the Lord of the Rings, like the original trilogy adaptation,
Yeah.
because they left out Tom Bombadil or whatever. So I mean, there's always going to be those people who hate on it, like we were kind of talking about in the last podcast. But I also think that if you have a valid opinion, or if there's things that like I am so passionate about the books, like it's just one of the best book series I've ever read, that it's hard to see it adapted in a way where you're like, oh, but you're missing this like massive chunk of information that's super crucial to me, but you're
Hmm.
making a show and it makes sense in the show because you just never reference it. So I
Exactly.
can blow your mind a little bit, and this isn't a spoiler for anyone unless you're like
Sure.
halfway through the book, turn it off right now. But a really good example is that in the book, there's a character called Lady Stoneheart. If anybody's aware of this character, she is a reincarnated Catelyn Stark. So Catelyn Stark, or Caitlin Stark, or however you pronounce it, she died at the Red Wedding. Obviously, she had her throat slit. She was thrown into the river naked. And again, another crazy part that's out of the book. Um, Nymeria is Arya's pet wolf, and
Yeah.
Nymeria actually drags
Her
Caitlin
body.
Stark's body out of the water, and then Thoros of Myr and Beric Dondarrion find her corpse, and they know who she is, and so that's how Beric dies. Beric actually breathes his life force into Caitlin Stark, and then Beric is no more. So in the show, where Beric's at the very end of the show with his like flaming sword and he's fighting everyone, like that's not real. That's not going to happen in the books because he's already dead. And Caitlin Stark is the one who is reincarnated, and she's actually leading the band of like the Brotherhood that's fighting against the Freys. And there's a whole prologue chapter dedicated to this one Frey meeting her, realizing it's Caitlin Stark, and then being hung. So it's just like this whole
Wow.
thing, and there's a whole cross story with her and Brienne and Jamie, and that's why Jamie actually ends up leaving his calling, like fighting and defending the realm, and follows Brienne. In the show, it's like kind of around the same thing. It's all in River Run,
Hmm.
but then he goes to meet. Lady Stoneheart with Brienne, and that's the last you see of them until hopefully the next book comes out and we find out what actually happens there. But there's a lot of really cool stuff that's left out of the show. Obviously, contextually, like they needed to keep it within an hour and so many episodes a season, so obviously things were going to get cut. But things like that, where it's like, oh, I would have loved to see a
Yeah.
reincarnated zombie Catelyn Stark, and would have built a whole other thing of like, wait a second, this magic that they're using to reincarnate people isn't the same magic as the White Walkers are using to reincarnate people, because Catelyn Stark is like conscious, like she's
Yeah.
following her desire for revenge only, and she doesn't even talk about her kids or anything. She's just revenge. But
Ah, okay.
again, that's like a really big one that I'm like, oh man, it's really too bad, you know? Like Lady Stoneheart's this awesome character, but just didn't make the cut.
Damn, that's unfortunate. I think that storyline would have been really fucking good.
Would have been sick.
Holy shit. I didn't I had like I said, I don't read the book, so that hearing that is crazy. I never knew that.
And there's
I
a
knew that
lot more.
I knew they left some things out of the books as far as big storylines, but I never really got to understand what storylines they took out, and that's huge. That is huge, bro. And I enjoyed. It's probably different for me because I didn't read the books. I did enjoy 1 through 7. 1 through 7 was a very good, very one of the best in my opinion as far as character developments for Jon Snow and Daenerys were legendary. Some of the best character developments in a TV show of all time. And like I said in previous shows, season 8 didn't do those character developments justice, and that's what made me so upset of season 8. But 1 through 7 was very different from how I looked at it compared to a book reader, and I never realized how. But little things like that makes a lot of sense. Makes a
Yeah.
lot of sense. Um, yeah, let's get into it.
Yeah.
Let's. I definitely wanted to talk about this because it was such a big storyline. Because the more content we get with Game of Thrones in general is better. You know what I'm saying?
Absolutely.
So guys, this was called Blood Moon. It was a prequel to Game of Thrones. It was supposed to be released right after, not right after Game of Thrones, but the next TV show that was supposed to be released was this. Um, I'll ask Colin in just a minute, but from what we know, the storyline wasn't written. It was it was written, but in 8 lines. There wasn't much behind the story of Blood Moon, and George R. R. Martin had announced that he was going to name it The Long Night. It was going to be around Naomi Watts. I'm not too sure what character she was going to play. Do you know who this is? No.
Yeah.
Um, uh, all I know is it was supposed to be her wedding day. That's the kind of news we got. It was going to be around her wedding day. The Starks and stuff are going to be at Castle Rock. There's pictures of her and Starks on a boat. I will get to that in just a minute. There was her and Starks on a boat. These images were from just the pilot. I want to get that clear. They only shot the pilot. Nothing was greenlit after that. So unfortunately, but this was for sure canceled. Here's some more pictures of Naomi Watts. And it's kind of unfortunate because it looks really good. So like even the pictures that, you know, you get her
Yeah.
and you get her in this. I mean, she looks, I don't know if she's supposed to be a Targaryen or um a Lannister. I'm assuming a Lannister. What's your opinion on this?
Well, and I think that's where, based on my understanding, it's kind of hard to say because, and I'll break down a little bit of the official, like, Westerosi history. So, around 12,000 years ago was the Dawn Age. Then you have the first men invading Westeros. You have the signing of the Pact 10,000 years ago. Age of Heroes around 10,000 years ago. And then the Long Night was 8,000 years ago.
Oh, it's
Um,
A. Okay, I read 5. I don't know where I read it
well,
at,
no,
but
this show may have done 5 because George, in writing the books, he corrected a little bit of his timeline. And you have to imagine, like, when you're writing a story as massive and encompassing as this, especially when you're dealing with thousands of years, like, thousands of years can make a difference, and you don't realize it until you're at a different point in the story. So he's
Yep.
corrected it so that the real long night now in the book canon is about 6,000 years ago. So,
Mm, okay.
but then this is kind of where it gets interesting, is that you have the long night 6,000 years ago, let's say, and then the long night ends with the building of the wall. And then after the wall is built is when the Night King comes into power. And there's a second
Okay.
long night. So there's two long nights that are in the history recorded, and they're separated only by like maybe 2,000 years. But the long night and that's why I'm like trying to pin down what long night are they talking about, because the original long night happened X amount of years ago, 6,000, let's say. But then the Game of Thrones long night that is referenced with the others coming and
Hmm.
with, ice spiders and all of that, that's way more recent history, but still like 4,000 years maybe ago in the main story. So it's kind of interesting to think about this because, yeah, all of the major houses were basically established in the Age of Heroes. So you had main characters like Lan the Clever. He's the one that founded the Lannister house,
Okay.
because he was a trickster and he stole like the gods' sunlight, and that made his hair gold, and therefore all of his heirs had golden hair. And he's kind of this like Prometheus figure, like stealing the fire of the gods and bringing it to Earth to like enlighten people, and also playing kind of like that Loki character of like a trickster god. And so a lot of the Age of
Mm.
Heroes characters are like these very drummed up, over the top, kind of like how we would see, I don't even know, like, going back in time and thinking of like all of the ancient heroes like Gilgamesh, right? Like the Epic of Gilgamesh, like this over the top guy, and he's doing all these amazing things and all these feats, but like there might have been a guy named Gilgamesh, but he probably wasn't like a god maybe, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So like a lot of he probably didn't make somebody out of mud and breathe life into him. Like all of those things were probably not true. I mean, I wasn't there, I don't know, but it's kind of the same way in the Game of Thrones universe, where you have these stories that are so ancient and so old that everything at this point is pretty much speculation
Yeah.
and
Exactly.
theory crafting around. And I have to say a lot of it is based on perspective and based on the person's motivation and the narrative that they're trying to spin. So a Lannister is going to be like, yeah, Lan the Clever was the best person in the world, he was amazing, he was great. And then you'll have a Stark being like, well, Bran the Builder, I mean, he built all this amazing stuff, look how great he was, he built the wall right by himself, and then he also somehow built the Storm's End, and he built
Yep.
the Citadel, and he built, like all these things. So it's like, well, I don't think this guy could have been everywhere at once, especially over the course of like thousands of years.
Yeah. Exactly.
But and that's where I think the myth and the legend kind of meld with, especially talking about making a show about it, is like, to your credit, you can kind of go in any direction because there's a lot of content around the Long Night, and in the books, yeah, that maybe that's all theory and ideas, but like what you choose to bring to life on the screen, that's real. So if there
Exactly.
were ice spiders, you can put ice spiders in there, and they could be 10-foot long ice spiders that are carrying White Walkers and all this crazy stuff. And it could be, and there's not like there's basis in the book to say that didn't happen. There's just like maybe that happened. I don't know. So
Yeah, and for this blood moon that it was supposed to be a royal wedding. So that's what we do know of what this is supposed to be, or what this was supposed to be. Obviously it's already been canceled, but
yeah,
um
it
when
wouldn't have been a Targaryen.
okay, then it was
So the
probably that it would
Targaryens aren't in Westeros at this time. They didn't come until Aegon the Conqueror invaded. That was the first time Targaryens came to Westeros, which is like 300 years before the main story.
okay, cool. Okay. Um so we're assuming since it's at Castle Rock, it's probably going to be a Lannister then. Okay.
Yeah, and
Um
probably a Stark. It looks like a Lannister marrying a Stark.
Yeah, so the I'll show the pictures again. There was a picture of a Stark sigil. Let me get to it one second. There's a and also the if you look at the sigil of the Starks, it looks a little bit different too. Looks a little bit different. It looks like
Yeah,
they
they've got
might
the
have
dire wolf.
yeah. They got the dire wolf, but the whole thing looks way different from what we're used to. So they probably you could tell this is going to be an older set earlier.
Yeah,
Yeah, this one's crazy looking. But yeah, so this was supposed to be set around around a wedding, guys, and we don't know what the whole story was going to be. Like Colin was saying, you know, there was only a little bit written about what this show is supposed to be about. They ended up canceling it because they didn't. The showrunner, I'm not too familiar with of her name, but they were supposed to write a story about this show, the Blood Moon, because George R. R. Martin didn't write he didn't write too much about it. So HBO was like, no, we you know, we don't want to be making things up. And I don't know if they said it like that, but I'm assuming they're like, you know, no, there's not enough written about it. I don't want to do it. I don't want them to, you know, greenlit this show. So, but this, I'm assuming this was filmed a couple years ago, maybe 3 years ago, because of because they thought it was supposed to be House of the Dragon, or they thought this was going to be before House of the Dragon. So
Yeah.
there's a whole lot that's there that we're not hearing, but all this has been released in the last couple days. Wanted to get a little more information, but as far as right now, that's pretty much all we got. But what did you? Oh, I'm sorry. There was one more thing. Um, they have explored origins for the White Walkers on the Long Night, um, and the Children of the Forest. They were going to mention something about Children of the Forest in Blood Moon as well. So there was going to be some kind of story revolving that. I'm sure we'll get something eventually, maybe 10 years from now, if anything, because if they keep going along with House of the Dragon, Game of Thrones, A Night of the Seven Kingdoms, we're going to need to know where all the White Walkers originated and the Children of
Yeah.
the Forest originated. Like there has to be some kind of background that we get, unless they do flashbacks. But I'd prefer like some kind of like present time
Right.
explanation of what's going on. You know what I'm saying? What do you think about that?
Well, and I was even gonna say, based on like the even like the set and the costume design, like it almost looks too modern
Yeah,
for
exactly.
being five. It looks like they're in Game of Thrones, which is like,
Exactly.
5,000 years, nobody's changed fashion, And I think that like, and it may be. So one thing that George is known for doing is, and I'm gonna forget the name of this tactic he uses in his writing, but interregnum. So he does and he writes a lot of sci-fi, or he wrote a lot of sci-fi like in the 70s and 80s. And what he was really known for doing, and that's why a lot of people draw like a line to his sci-fi writing with Game of Thrones, and they're like, actually, maybe this is part of a sci-fi universe, and this is just how this planet developed. But basically, an interregnum is like there's a society that has reached spacefaring age, and then a cataclysm occurs in which they lose the ability to travel through space, and then the society regresses back to like swords and shields and basically that
Gotcha.
type of mentality. So like the idea of like a great society existing 5,000 years ago, and then the long night happens, and then another great society emerges after the long night, totally falls in line. I think one of the things that would have been interesting is seeing what like the North looked like without the Starks being as wardens of the North, but like kind of
Yeah.
vying for power against the Boltons and against the Umbers and the internal stripes that you see there. Because the history of the Stark House is actually like way more bloody than they would make it look like in the show. Like it's good because in the books even they're kind of like the main characters of the books too. Like all of the Stark
Okay.
children are like you're rooting for them throughout the whole series of the books too. But at the same time, you look back on their past and it's like, actually, you guys were like savage barbarians not that long ago. It's really the modernization of all of Westeros under the Targaryen rule that brought a lot of civilization to some of these more brutal tribes. Like, for
Yeah.
instance, and this is kind of George has so many little tips and tricks, or it's kind of like Easter eggs throughout. But he does kind of like a vampires versus werewolves in the North, and the Starks are the werewolves and the Boltons are the vampires. So the Boltons used to hunt Starks and skin them and then wear their suits
Ooh.
because they thought that skin changing was an abomination. And even now sometimes even up in the north with the wildlings, the wargs are kind of like they're weird and they're powerful, but like that's weird magic. We're not about that. That's how the Boltons were during this time period. So the warring and the stuff that was going on would also be really interesting to see portrayed, because you'd have
Oh
these
yeah.
characters that like, oh, he's a Stark, he's a good guy, and it's like, oh, he's like murdering babies, you know, like
Yeah.
he's sacrificing, literally sacrificing humans to the trees, like cutting
Yep.
their throats right in front of the werewood tree and letting the blood go into the werewood tree. And that was a very, very standard practice in the North. So a lot of things, and we can even go into like where the origins of the White Walk, not the origins, but like I kind of hinted at it at the other podcast where the bastard children from the North, it's theorized that they were actually the original sacrifices to the Nightwalker, or to the White Walkers, kind of like how Craster sacrifices his sons to
Yeah.
the White Walkers. Um,
By the
there's
way,
a
did they
whole thing
ever
about
go
that.
into that? Because in the
Yeah,
show, of course,
no.
they didn't. Of course, in the show they didn't. But in the books, they never really deep dived into why they sacrificed.
Well, so with him, and I guess it's again kind of a perspective thing. So he's like the people that keep to the old gods basically worship the others, and whether they are conscious of that is indeterminable. But the old gods are the others, are the spirits in the trees, are, and it's kind of weird because it would be like saying I think that in the true story that the others are kind of like a bastardization of the old gods. So the old gods were truly the werewood trees. So the
Okay.
werewood trees would absorb the consciousness of the dying people. So they would live like the werewood trees are basically like a heaven state for, or a collective unconscious or a hive mind of all of the dead children of the forest originally, right? Only children of the forest, because this is, let's go back to before the first men came over, and we can talk a little bit about that. But the first men came over through the Arm of Dorn, which is way, way, way south, and then eventually worked their way up. But the children of the forest were dying after however many hundreds of years of their natural lifespan, and their souls or consciousness or being would be absorbed into the trees, and then people could, green seers could commune with the trees and basically get
Mm,
all of the knowledge and information that every single generation before them had, and that would help them live a better life and, you know, produce more goods or whatever it is. You know, they would be
yeah.
better at their existence because they had all this history um, that was never lost or tarnished or manipulated. It was true. So then the idea is that something from inside of the tree left the tree and absorbed the White Walk, like became the White Walkers. And now the White Walkers are like a physical manifestation of the spirits inside of the trees. So there's kind of this like duality of like almost like a good and evil, but at the same time, the way that the show did it is like the White Walkers were humans created by others, or sorry, by children of the forest using
Yeah.
this method, and we still don't know what that even is. Um, and
All we
how
know is
the
the black what's it called, the black stones, what was
yeah,
it
the
called again?
dragon glass.
Dragon glass. The dragon glass was pushed into his chest, and that was it. That was all
Yeah,
we saw.
and it's like, yeah, they did it like at a heart tree, and they did it like in this weird spiral ritual thing, which was like a reoccurring theme in the end of the seasons.
Hmm.
um but they never really talked about that. They never really went into like the true children of the forest history. Like a lot of the stuff was kind of left vague, and again, because there isn't even book content to support anything.
Exactly.
And so I think that that's also kind of playing a risky game for show makers, is when the majority of the people who are going to watch your show, or not even the majority, but when a lot of the people who are going to watch your show are going to get hypercritical over, hey, well, they're just making stuff up. It's like,
Exactly.
well,
Yep.
you know, what do you want them to do? There's no
No,
information. And if
yep.
George would just finish the last two books, then we will have the origins of the White Walkers in the last two books, like the canon book version of it. And I don't think it's going to be that way, although I do believe that the Children of the Forest did create the White Walkers. How that process happened, I don't know. And I don't
Hmm.
know if it involved a human being. I don't know what that case is, but I do know that there are I I I strongly believe that the Children of Forest are kind of like they're the product of their actions are defending their way of life. So they
Gotcha.
were like, well, we know how to kill these things. We can use dragon glass to kill the White Walkers, but the humans don't know that. So let's
Exactly.
just unleash a ton of them, and then our human problem's gone. And I can kind of go into why that happened, but I do think it would have been cool to see like ancient Westeros, but at the same time, if it was a super society that just got destroyed by the Long Night, it wouldn't have looked that much different. And it's kind of funny because in the books, people get obviously super analytical, but
Oh
the
yeah.
way that they describe castles, so, and this is true about real art, like archaeology as well as engineering designs for castles, square castles are older than round castles, right? So like a rounded castle tower is like an engineering feat that they didn't understand how to do before they did. So
Oh,
all of the
okay.
castles that are squared are way older than the castles that are round. But then the oldest tower in Winterfell is a round
The
tower,
round tower, yep.
and it's the oldest. It predates the actual castle.
Yeah.
So it's like there had to have been a society before this that knew all of this stuff, and then died in the long night, were left, and the book doesn't really talk as much about like the Andals versus the First Men versus the Targaryens versus, because there's so many different like races, and there's this race called like the Brindled Men, and they're literally like pig people. Like they have hair all over their body, it's all bristled, they have like a razor back, and they're sailors. And it's just like they never go to Westeros. You just see them as like from Arya's point of view when she's in Bravos. She sees
Yes.
so many different types of people, but there's all these different races of people. And the Andals are like kind of like the European settlers that eventually came over to the United States. Like they had iron, they had fire, they had ships, they had armor. Like they weren't these like Stone Age or Bronze Age like warriors that were here. Like the children of the forest couldn't stand against them because their technology was non-existent. The children of the forest got beat by the first men who were in the Bronze Age when they crossed over. So it's
Yeah.
just like all of these different stories, or not stories, but all these different like kind of breaks in history point to there being probably a race that came before
Before
everyone
them.
that actually knew everything. And chances are they actually had dragon writing as well.
Yeah, and that's a dude, that's a great point because you would think that there was, because of the long night, the first long night, there was some kind of civilization that happened before, and they did what they did, but it looked like they might have been wiped out, not wiped out completely, but wiped out to where there wasn't much to show out before that. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And it's crazy. And kind of to go back to what you were saying is like, in a way, Blood Moon would have been good, but at the same time, I think people just like the fact that there's multiple Game of Thrones shows on the air at once. But if you
Totally.
really break it down and think about it, because this show wasn't written um, from books, you kind of get that source material that he didn't write, unless he writes something about it now. I don't know if I want it just because of how season 8 ended, and season 7, I got to admit, wasn't bad. Season 7 was also not written.
Yeah.
Um, so there's a mixture between season 7 and season 8 that I don't know if I want to take that chance to see if, because this isn't written, if it might be bad, and give
Right.
Game of Thrones that kind of that name, that, oh, here we go, another shit that's not written. We're gonna be making shit up. So it's kind of you have to be able to kill it. And if HBO wasn't satisfied of what they wrote or what they read, I mean, you got to give it to them for having a higher standard than what they put out for season 8. And I kind of want to go back to Blood Moon real quick.
Yeah.
Um, or not Blood Moon in general, but there was George R. R. Martin said they have two pilots in development in some sort. They were hoping to get one of them green, or both of them greenlit to shoot a pilot, hoping that they can get one more than one Westeros show on the air. So we're assuming House of the Dragon is the one, and Night of the Seven Kingdoms is the second. So Night of the Seven Kingdoms is supposed to be greenlit, hopefully this year, or not, it is greenlit, but it's supposed to be filmed this sometime this year.
Mm-hmm.
And we're going to be getting a second show on the air. But what's your opinion on a Night of the Seven Kingdoms?
I'm super excited for that, honestly. I really One, they're novellas, so they're super short. So making
Okay,
like one season per book, you could pretty much do the book. Like there's no reason to differentiate from the source
the
material that much.
okay,
And the books are kind of so there's a character called Duncan the Tall, and
hmm,
he's a hedge knight, and the it opens with him basically like tending to his master or whatever, his like the knight that raised him. as he's dying, right? So he's like, "Oh, you're dying," and he becomes a knight at that point. And I don't want to drop a bunch of spoilers if somebody's ever interested, but essentially it's him, and he meets up with Aegon Targaryen, who is the unlikely Aegon. He's like the one that is the Mad King's father. And you don't know, there's no line of succession yet. He basically doesn't think he's ever going to be king because he's so far removed from the throne. But so many
Oh,
events
okay.
happen that eventually lead him to being King Aegon, who ends up fathering the Mad King.
The
So
Mad King. Okay.
there's a lot of um, storylines that are crossed with people, and this is like, I think it's like 75 years before the main story, right around there. So you meet Walder Frey as like a child.
Gotcha.
You meet Tyrion's or like the Lannisters' mother before she's a Lannister. So you meet all these characters like in their infantile stage, um, and it's kind of cool to see like Walder Frey is like awful as a child, and then he grows up to be Walder Frey, and you're like, oh, that makes perfect sense. Like
Yeah.
he's a terrible person. And there are 3 books out right now with that, and I think he's writing the 4th one currently in conjunction with all these other things he's writing.
Oh yeah.
But that the 4th one is the one I'm most looking forward to because it's supposed to be set in Winterfell. So
Mm,
Egg and Dunk go north to Winterfell, and I think it's called the Wolves of Winter. And it's like all of the women of Winterfell, because all of the men have like died in this war. They're off fighting or whatever, and it's like him interacting with all of these like strong women who are running Winterfell, and him like kind of trying to navigate that and help them, because his whole deal is taking Egg into situations and showing him that there's a better way of solving these problems than just being like, I'm the king, do what I say, or hey, I've got a bigger sword, I'm going to beat the crap out of you and you're going to do what I say. It's like, actually, you can be diplomatic in pretty much every situation. So that's why Aegon was such a good king, was because he traveled all of Westeros with Duncan the Tall, who ended up being the head of his Kingsguard.
yeah.
Um, but all of those people that he interacted with, all of these stories, he hung out with the small folk. He had this relationship with people that was beyond like, I'm a Targaryen, don't ever even think about touching me, to like,
Exactly.
I'm literally sleeping on the side of the road in like a burlap sack, like a true rags to riches, but really he's rich the entire time.
Wow, that's dude, man. Even without you spoiling it, I like that in particular is what I expect that story to go. Like people are gonna start falling in love with Egg, and people are, he's gonna be sleeping with, or like you said, he's gonna be sleeping with the small folk. He's gonna be sleeping with the, the rich, the poor, the ugly. It's gonna show his story about how he, and then Duncan the Tall is going to be there right with him, telling him what to do and how to act, and he's going to be a product of Duncan the Tall. I've heard good things about Duncan the Tall, so
Yeah, I mean,
uh,
he's a really fun character because he's humongous. He's like,
yeah.
and another thing that's kind of funny is that like actual main characters in the story are descendants of him. So Brienne is a descendant of his, and
Oh, okay, okay, okay.
it's rumored that Hodor, and that's not confirmed, but that would make sense if he goes up to Winterfell,
Yeah,
that Hodor is one of his descendants. It's rumored that the Cleganes are
Click
his
James. Yeah.
descendants. So like, Dunk spread his wild oats.
Oh
He was
yeah.
known for that. But he's just like this giant dude, and he's like, uh, he's really good with a sword. So like, he's massive and he's strong and he's powerful, but he's like super slow of thought. So it's
Yeah.
like they call him Dunk the Lunk. He's like thick as a castle wall. He's just like this dumb guy. But it's not that he's dumb, it's just that he's very thoughtful. So he
Yeah.
doesn't like to kind of sell himself on everything, but again, just a down to earth guy, somebody that's like, it's going to be interesting following somebody that is relatable to like everyone. Like, man, this guy's just out there trying to be a good guy. He's just trying to help
Yeah.
people. He's trying to fulfill his duties as a knight. But yeah, no, Dunk's awesome. Dunk's
Cool.
awesome.
Dude, I'm excited, bro. I am very excited. And guys, that's speculated to be filmed, I believe they said in August. Don't quote me on that. But it's supposed to be filmed sometime this year. Um so um keep a lookout for, follow the channel. Let us know what you guys think of Night of the Seven Kingdoms, and we'll put out more information once we get it. Last piece of news I wanted to get to is there's reshoots for House of the Dragon season 2. They're expected to last 2 to 3 weeks. As far as the release date, it's pretty much going to be staying the same. But I like this news, bro. I like that they didn't. Most TV shows and movies do have reshoots, but the ones that don't, you kind of think in your head like, there's no way they did it perfect the first time.
Right.
And most of the time you hear people, or you hear shows that come out and movies that come out, and you hear that they do reshoots, and those come most of the time those come out just great. The shows come out great. So I do love news like this. This is why I wanted to kind of bring it up. But what's your opinion on this? Do you think it's good or bad that there's reshoots?
I mean, I would assume it's good. I would like similar to you. I think that like for me, it's like if you're taking the time and even risking delaying the show, which it sounds like there's no risk in delaying the show, which makes it
Hmm.
easier to do. But if you're risking delaying a show because you're doing a reshoot or because you wanted to take a different angle on something, it's because you're watching the entire thing.
Yeah.
Like if they have the entire thing already filmed and they're like, this scene just doesn't fit. We need to shoot it here, or we need to change which characters are involved in this conversation. I think that that's from a watcher's point of view, like you said, like shows that choose not to do that and are just like, it's fine the way it is. Like I mean, we don't necessarily get to see how the sausage is made, but like you can sometimes tell when you're like, man, did they really think all the way through? Like, is that the
Exactly.
best way they could have filmed that? So I think it's a good thing. I mean, I think anything that takes a second look at it is always going to be a better approach. But then I guess you run into the issue of getting like too analytical on it and you're
Yeah.
dissecting it too much. But it's 1 to 2 reshoots doesn't sound like they're doing that either. So I think it's a good thing. I think it's a good thing.
Yeah, and they said they're expected for it to last only 2 to 3 weeks, so not much is going to be. I mean, a good amount could be filmed 2 to 3 weeks, but it doesn't look like major things they're gonna be filming. Maybe a couple of scenes here and there that didn't come out proper, stuff like that. So
Yeah.
we're expecting that to be the same. But yeah, we'll wrap it up there. Guys, let us know in the comments what you guys thought about the Blood Moon news. Do you guys think they should eventually release it? Do you think they should take the risk on writing their own version of what happened at that time? Like we said, the book didn't tell us much about what happened, so ultimately they decided to not greenlit the show because of the source material. um Let us know what you guys think about the reshoots. Let us know what you guys think about season 2 coming up, what you guys are excited for. But I want to thank you, Colin, for joining me. I appreciate it. Unfortunately, Colin does not have social media, but he'll be on the show plenty of times. So let us know in the comments what you guys thought about Colin, since he doesn't have social media. But
Like,
but
share, and subscribe on here.
yeah, exactly. Guys, like, share, subscribe. Let us know some other news that you guys want us to cover. If you guys want to follow me on social media, Tones_TV on all platforms. And go ahead and follow the podcast, Bad Thoughts Podcast with me and Kenny Camper. All right. Hope you guys have a great night. Love y'all.